Well, House Republicans expanding the Biden impeachment inquiry. Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer and Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan are now investigating whether President Biden was involved with Hunter's decision to defy a congressional subpoena earlier in this month. They're demanding that all documents and communications sent or received by the White House related to Hunter Biden's deposition. Comer writing on X, quote, "We are compelled to examine, as part of our impeachment inquiry, whether President Joe Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct a proceeding of Congress. Such conduct could constitute an impeachable offense." The Republicans zeroing in on these comments from the White House press secretary after Hunter defied that subpoena. Watch.
The president was certainly familiar with what his son was going to say, and I think what you saw was from the heart from his son.
Joining me now is former acting ICE director and former federal prosecutor Jonathan Fahey. Jonathan, good morning. Your reaction?
Good morning. You know, this is really surprising to me how careless they would be because, yeah, the statements of the White House spokesperson clearly show that there was coordination between, or at least appear to show there was coordination between Hunter's legal team or Hunter and the President of the United States, for not only with respect to not defying the subpoena, but also with the statement that he made afterwards, which was pretty much a political statement in line with the Biden campaign theme of this year, is the MAGA Republicans and things like that. And the other thing that's really troubling is, we have President Biden on record saying people that defied subpoenas, like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, should be prosecuted by the DOJ, and then his own son does the same thing, and presumably after talking to him about it, which is really concerning. And the concern is, are they concerned about what he would say, or was it just simply defying them for the sake of defiance?
I want to bring in Tiana Lodesher on this topic. Tiana, go ahead.
I don't think that there's too much ambiguity about whether or not the president knew that his son was going to defy that subpoena, right? Considering that we got photos of Hunter Biden on Air Force One with the president in the days surrounding that date when he was supposed to appear in front of Congress. But this question of obstruction of Congress, if Joe Biden knew, although Democrats used obstruction of congressional proceedings against Donald Trump in, especially that first impeachment with the whole Ukraine issue, that's not actually a criminal charge, is it?
Well, I think what would be that I think you can have obstruction, witness tampering, and things like that. And this is if this is a valid subpoena, these could be potentially criminal charges, or the criminal contempt charge, which is a federal offense, which is what Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro were charged with. So if they're conspiring to obstruct or to defy the subpoena, these certainly could be federal charges. And the question is, what did he know? How much was he involved? Was he just simply informed, or were they consulting? But it is very concerning, because you would think that the smart move would have been keep a wall between them with respect to this issue and have no coordination, no communications. That would be sort of 101 in terms of if you're advising a client. So it really does raise a concern that there's something else going on here.
I want to move on to another topic. A lot of news breaking this week. So the Michigan Supreme Court rejecting an attempt to remove former President Trump from the state's 2024 Republican primary ballot, stating that they were not persuaded that the case should be reviewed by the court. Trump reacting on Truth Social, saying the court, quote, strongly and rightfully denied the desperate Democrat attempt to remove him from the ballot. Now, the Colorado Republican Party is now asking the Supreme Court to overturn the ruling disqualifying Trump from their state's ballot. Jonathan, weigh in on this. This is political risk that's happening in these two states. Obviously, it looks like they might be singling out. This is a political attack on former President Trump. You could take that, but also the legal side. What's your opinion?
Well, it seems like at this point, I think there's 6 states that have ruled that President Biden or President Trump can stay on the ballot, and Colorado is the outlier. But when you have these, two, competing analysis of the law, this has to be resolved by the Supreme Court, because, in effect, one of them needs to be right. And I think the problem with the Colorado Supreme Court, just fundamentally, not putting aside the merits, but there's really was no due process for President Trump. And it does seem to be an extraordinary reading of the 14th Amendment to make this ruling. But the Supreme Court does does have to get involved, and they're going to strike down this Colorado law, in my opinion, or the Colorado ruling, in my opinion, and President Trump will stay on the ballot. And of course, the irony of all of this, of these people talking about protecting democracy while trying to preclude candidates they don't like from getting on the ballot, is certainly hypocritical. But I think the Supreme Court will get involved soon, and they will overrule those Colorado Supreme Court.
All right. Well, obviously, from the legal side of it, I think it's interesting that you say that this not only has to go to the Supreme Court, but that Colorado case has no merit, to my point that this is being viewed very much as a political attack and a political move, but trying to use the courts to do that. I want to move on to the other issue here, and this is Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. So they met with Mexican President Obrador yesterday. So the Mexican president is claiming important agreements were reached. Mayorkas calling the meeting productive. Kind of a difference of opinion here. Former Border Patrol Chief under both presidents, Trump and Biden, Rodney Scott, slammed that meeting on X. He said cartels use illegal aliens to distract law enforcement. The Biden administration uses photo ops like this to distract you from their failed policies. I mean, look, all of this at the end of the day, from a legal perspective as well here, Jonathan, is that we have an open border, laws are being ignored, and at some point, is anybody going to call on the Biden administration and hold them accountable for what's happening at our border?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right question. Rodney Scott's exactly right, too. This is just to create, this meeting is to create the pretense that they are doing something about this issue, that they're taking it seriously. But everyone that follows this closely knows that the solution lies here, not with Mexico. It's, do we enforce our own laws? How do you go to Mexico and ask them to help when their response would be, you don't even enforce your laws, you demonize people that seek to enforce your laws, you're emboldened in these cartels that hurt Mexicans as well. And our policies, meaning the United States policies with the open border policies, have strengthened the cartels, have increased drug trafficking, have increased human trafficking. But again, this is just a photo op, a game, and this idea of some understandings were reached or agreements. It doesn't really matter what was reached, because this administration is determined to keep this border open no matter what, and they're going to do this, but they want to make it seem to the public, at least to the people that aren't paying close attention, that this is overly complicated and that they're treating it seriously. Both of those are false. This issue could be solved, and they need to treat it seriously, and they need to put the American people first for change and not all these other interests. Yeah,
no, and cracking down on the cartels, which, let's be honest, maybe this is the pessimist to me as somebody that grew up in Texas and Arizona, but the cartels have been ruling the roost down there for decades. This is nothing new at all. Jonathan Fahey, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.